Hello, hello. I see everyone's joining. The doors are open. People are coming in. Welcome. I'm Jane Farrow, the Community Engagement Facilitator. We're just going to take a couple of minutes to get everyone in the door and we're going to get rolling. We have a full agenda with lots of time to open the floor for your comments, questions, and concerns. A number of people I see are joining by phone, which is great. The technology is working. And of course, by virtual streaming as well. So it's great. We have about 75 attendees at the moment. So that's wonderful. Thank you for making it. So I'm just going to start. We're 3 minutes in and you're on time and it's time to get rolling. Maybe we want to bring the cameras up on the panelists who are representing the City of Toronto, various staffers, as well as Councillor Filion. I'm here to basically just moderate, facilitate, make a space for comments and concerns and answers from city staff. We'll go into the agenda in a bit more detail. Of course, for more information about this, you can hit the toronto.ca 3 Park Home website. More information will be posted there soon. And in terms of accessibility, if you require accommodation, phoning in is a better option than the computer audio for the adaptive technology. So before we do any more introductions, I'd like to introduce Kiefer, who will be doing a land acknowledgement. So over to, Kiefer. You can introduce Kiefer Shields. You can introduce yourself on behalf of the city. Kiefer?
Hi, everyone. My name is Kiefer Shields. I'm a program coordinator with the Capital Development Unit at SSHA. And we acknowledge the land we are on is the traditional territory of many nations, including the Mississaugas of the Credit, the Anishinaabe, the Chippewa, the Haudenosaunee, and the Wendat peoples, and is now home to many diverse First Nations, Inuit, and Métis peoples. We also acknowledge that Toronto is covered by Treaty 13, signed with Mississaugas of the Credit, and the Williams Treaty, signed with multiple Mississaugas and Chippewa bands.
Thank you very much, Kiefer. You will be probably back on as a panelist eventually. All right, so this is just some basic information about connecting by phone. If you're on phone, of course, you wouldn't be able to see this maybe. So if you're having trouble, as I said, understanding and you need adaptive accommodations, please dial 647-558-0588 or 855-703-8985 to connect to the session by telephone. The webinar ID is 874-1696-4275, and the passcode is 240648. If you're having trouble, just dial that number, and there are people standing by to give you a hand. But it seems like there's a bunch of people here by phone. We're up to about 87 attendees already, which is terrific. So next slide. Just so you know, the meeting is being recorded. It'll be posted on the project website on the City of Toronto's YouTube channel. So we'll caution you to not identify and share personal information about yourself. You can use your first name if you want, but ideally not a second name. It's just to protect privacy. Don't say what street you live on. It's just better that information not be in this public record. But we invite you to either ask a question on the chat, on the Q&A, which I can read for you, or you can put your hand up and ask your question by audio. You won't be appearing on video, but your voice will be heard either on the phone or through the virtual platform. Next slide. The presenters this evening, Councillor John Filion. He's here on the screen. Maybe turning on the camera now would be good to meet Loretta Ramadin, the project director of Capital Development Unit of SSHA. And we also have Sharon Campbell. You'll be hearing from her about the program proposed at the proposed shelter. She's the director of Homelessness Initiatives and Prevention Services. And Alison Folasea, who works with corporate real estate management. She'll be probably responding to a bunch of questions you'll have about the lease and why this hotel and things like that. So we have a whole bunch of people plus a bevy of support people. If they can't answer the question, they've got staff behind them that can support. And if there's something we really can't answer, we'll get that to you by email after the meeting. So let's go to the next slide. Just a quick overview of tonight's agenda. This is a 2-hour meeting. We're going to have some opening remarks from Councillor Filion. We're going to have a presentation all about the program, the lease, the overview of this site and the proposed refugee shelter there. And then we have 70 minutes assigned for the Q&A for your questions, concerns, and offers of support. And we will be documenting this. And as I say, following up with information if we don't have it tonight. I'm sure there will be many questions. So we have already received 38 questions through our email account, the Gmail account for this proposed shelter, many of which there were some repetition. So we'll try to sort of, consolidate those questions and, make the most of that. People are really curious about things that, they have shared concerns. So next slide, I think gets us to another acknowledgement, which I believe Kiefer will be back to read as well. Or Zuna Khalid is going to read.
Hi, everyone. My name is Zuna Khalid. I'm also a coordinator programs with planning and engagement team at SSHA. Though I'm not a person of African descent, I am committed to continuously acting in support of and in solidarity with Black communities seeking freedom and reproductive justice in light of the history and ongoing legacy of slavery that continues to impact Black communities in Canada. As part of this commitment, I would also like to acknowledge that not all people came to these lands as migrants and settlers. Specifically, I wish to acknowledge those of us who came here involuntarily, particularly those brought from the lands as a result of the transatlantic slave trade and slavery. In support of the City of Toronto's ongoing efforts to confronting anti-Black racism, I pay tribute to those ancestors of African origin and descent.
Thank you very much, Zuna. And now over to Councillor Filion for some opening remarks.
Thanks, Jane, and thanks everybody for coming out tonight. I want to start out with, I guess on behalf of the city, an apology for the speed with which this has come up. I was caught off guard by it myself and let people know about it as soon as I knew about it. But that is not how we like to do things. And so I apologize for that. There certainly were some reasons for the speed with which it came up. The main factors of that being that we have refugees and refugee claimants arriving at a very rapid rate since the end of COVID, and we need to house them. And this is the last regularly scheduled meeting of Toronto City Council until not only after the election, but end of January, beginning of February. So 6 months till the next meeting. So there was an urgency to get something on an agenda, but again, not the way we like to do things. I have had several conversations with the mayor about this, who agrees with that sentiment. And we are looking for a procedural way to perhaps have this go to a council meeting called for a different purpose in August. And he said for me to pass on that if we are unable to get everyone's questions dealt with, concerns addressed, and get everything in place that needs to be put in place prior to council dealing with this, that he will work with me to figure out a procedural mechanism to try to have it put off by 4 weeks so that those things can happen. So, I am extremely supportive of this initiative. I think we have an obligation as Canadians and citizens of the world to help refugees. I think most people, by far most Canadians, agree with that, and we're very proud of our history of that. But we need to do things right, and I can tell you, while I am in office until November 15th, I will be working on this just about every day. And, you know, I'm committed to making sure this is done as well as it possibly can be. And again, thank you for coming out.
Great. Thank you, Councillor. Councillor will be sticking around and available, and it will be, I'm certain, participating in the meeting. So that's not the only time we'll be hearing from Councillor Filion at all. Okay, the next slide just goes over a couple of things about accessibility, which we've covered in some ways already. Panelists will describe the content on the slides, but in most cases, it's 90% text. So there won't be a lot of descriptive content. Zoom is a pretty friendly format. As you can see, if you are on the virtual platform, you've got a Q&A button as well as raising your hand. That's what you'll use during the Q&A. The Q&A is open, and you can type in your questions now, though we hope and ask that you wait until the presentation is over so you can kind of glean some of the information that's being offered. But it is open. If you really want to, you can. And next slide, please. We have a code of conduct. This is This is read at all meetings. And of course, it's all about being respectful, making room for everyone to have time, and limit your comments and questions to one thing at a time. Listen, be respectful, be patient, and of course, you know, racist or other forms of prejudicial, derogatory, or discriminatory comments and questions, including name calling, won't be tolerated. We do have the mute button, but we're not anticipating. I've never seen it used. I think we have to say it, but I've never had to use this. I think people know how to get their ideas and comments across, even when there's a bit of emotion. I'm okay with that. Let's be humans and respect that everyone's doing their best here as well, even running the meeting. So with that, let's turn it over to the City of Toronto staffer, Sharon Campbell. Hey, Sharon. How you doing?
Hello. Can you hear
Thanks.
me okay?
Yeah, we can help you hear you. Great.
Great.
So, all right, Sharon is the director, the acting director of homelessness initiatives and prevention services for Shelter Support and Housing Administration in City of Toronto. And Sharon, can we just say in plain language, what does that mean that you do related to this project?
So in my role as acting director, I'm responsible for all of our shelter programs within, you know, directly operated as well as purchase of service programs.
Fabulous. All right, the floor is yours.
All righty. Good evening, everyone. I want to thank you for taking the time this evening to join us to hear more about Tweed Park Home Avenue and the services and supports planned for this site. I'm going to walk you through a presentation that provides an overview of the current need for temporary accommodations for refugees and refugee claimants in Toronto and the services that Shelter Support and Housing Administration provides. I hope this presentation addresses some of the questions that you may have, and after the presentation, staff will be available to answer your questions or respond to your concerns. Next slide, please. Alrighty. Okay, so in terms of the images that you're seeing here right now, the need for refugee accommodations. The city has seen a steady increase in refugees seeking temporary accommodations since September 2021, primarily driven by the border reopening and easing of international travel restrictions. In the first half of 2022, an average of 55 new refugees per week have been accessing Toronto's shelter system, and there are currently 1,700 refugee clients in shelters. Toronto continues to provide a safe haven for refugees and refugee claimants looking to build new lives for themselves and their families. The city continues to request immediate and urgent action from the federal and provincial government to to plan for the large-scale increase in refugee claimant arrivals to avoid a potential crisis. This includes intergovernmental strategies and funding. The city, we continue to call for more effective intergovernmental planning to mitigate the length of time refugee claimants utilize temporary shelters and to improve housing outcomes. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. The need for refugee accommodations. Reasons why people seek refugee status in Canada vary. Individuals may have fled their home countries or were forced to flee due to armed conflicts, political unrest, or persecution due to race, religion, or political opinion. Currently, Toronto's shelter system serves refugees from all over the world, including individuals from Africa, the Caribbean, South America, Europe, the Middle East, and Central and South Asia. I must note that the city is working with local municipalities on a regional response plan to provide temporary accommodations to those fleeing the Ukraine. The proposed use of 3 Park Home Avenue is not part of this response effort. SSHA's refugee programs, we currently work with 5 different nonprofit organizations to provide support specifically to homeless refugees across 7 sites. These sites are presently supporting more than 1,100 refugees, both singles and families. Refugees are supported through the immigration process to access income support with settlement needs such as language, education, and employment opportunities, and with housing searches. SSHA also contracts several smaller refugee centers to support and rapidly house refugee claimants without having to access the shelter system. SSHA provides housing benefits to support our refugee service providers to quickly house refugee claimants. I just wanted to mention that we've got some really good housing outcomes from our refugee programs. For example, in 2021, we moved 442 individuals. They were discharged from our refugee shelters to permanent housing. Also want to flag that for 2022, so far, year to date, we have moved 587 individuals, and they have been discharged to permanent housing. And so, we're here today to talk about 3 Park Homes. So a proposal is going to Toronto City Council this week to use 3 Park Home Avenue to meet the current need for temporary accommodations for refugees and refugee claimants. The proposed program at 3 Park Home will provide safe shelter as well as wraparound supports aimed at helping refugees and refugee claimants find and secure permanent housing and build connection to the community. Funding for the 3 Park Home will be based on the federal government's commitment to reimburse the city for the costs it incurs in providing accommodations for the refugee sector in 2022.
Thank you. Sharon, was there anything else that you wanted to add about the funding for Park Home being based on federal government commitments? I believe on the last slide, there was an important note about financing.
Yeah, I mean, we've been working really closely with our partners, the federal partners, to ensure that we are reimbursed for whatever costs this program is going to, to whatever costs we're going to incur. There's like a chargeback process that we're working on. Okay, great. Thank you. Okay, we will now hand it over to Loretta Ramadan, who is the project director of Capital Development Unit of Shelter Support and Housing Administration of the City of Toronto. Loretta, you have the floor.
Thank you. Good evening, everyone. Can you shift to the next slide, please? Thank you. A common community question we are asked is about how the city makes decisions about the sites that are selected for a new shelter. And so I would like to spend a few minutes sharing information that I hope is helpful. Shelters are one of many municipal services that the city provides, like daycares, libraries, and community centers. It is important that shelters are available in neighborhoods across the City of Toronto. When searching for a new shelter location, City staff will seek buildings that are available, affordable, and of a suitable size and close to transit and services. Prior to the pandemic, SSHA also operated a number of hotel locations to expand and contract available space quickly in response to shelter demand. These sites were primarily serving families and refugees, but now the majority are part of the COVID-19 response. Hotel sites were previously selected through a request for proposal process to support this initiative. As authorized by City of Toronto bylaws, city staff have the delegated authority to site new shelters in locations that meet zoning requirements before engaging with the community. City staff also work closely with the community as part of the engagement process to ensure the site is successful in the community. The criteria for selecting a shelter location is what this next slide will speak to. Due to the urgency of this search, we conducted a search for a location that was more or less turnkey ready for operations with minimal retrofits required, that would adequately allow us to meet physical distancing guidelines, was available right away, and was close to transit, as well as being accessible. Hotels are considered optimal solutions as they provide the furniture and physical distancing shelters residents may require by providing their own rooms and bathrooms. And the hotels are also able to provide cleaning services as well as catering services when required. All potential properties identified for use were assessed by an interdivisional team in consideration of the planned program needs. Next slide. Thank you. 3 Park Home Avenue, which operates as the Novotel Toronto North York, is a 20-story hotel located at Yonge and Park Home Avenue. It has 260 guest rooms spread through floors 4 through 19. Floors 1 through 3 of the building contain a number of common spaces, including a restaurant, ballrooms, and a conference rooms. This will provide space to provide programming to residents. These floors also contain offices that can be used by site staff. The site is conveniently located beside North York Centre Station. The neighborhood also contains a number of amenities for residents, including the North York Central Library, the Douglas Snow Aquatic Center, the Meridian Arts Center, with whom Councillor Fillion is working with to provide programming for the clients, parks and green spaces, public transportation, as well as Mel Lastman Square.
Okay. Thank you very much, Loretta. And finally, we're going to hear from Allison Folisea. She's the Director of Transaction Services with the Corporate Real Estate Management for the City of Toronto. Allison, you have the floor.
Thanks, Jane. We'll go to the next slide. So we thought it would be helpful to just give a brief overview of the lease agreement, or the bulk accommodations agreement that will support transitioning this site to support refugee services. It is a 5-year agreement commencing at the beginning of September of this year. As Loretta mentioned, the property contains 260 hotel units. The agreement as it is structured right now provides for a ramp up period, but the anticipation is for the majority of the term, the entire hotel will be occupied and all of the rooms will be used. The gross rent that will be paid by the city starts off at about 9.2 million for the first year and rises to approximately 11.1 million during the 5th year of the term. I think it's important to note that the hotel operator will continue to run the hotel and provide all key hotel services, including catering, cleaning, building operations, maintenance, all of those key things that you would typically find in a hotel. The hotel will be staffed by hotel staff 24 hours a day, and housekeeping and laundry services will also be provided. Finally, as a part of the structure, we are also entering into a catering contract whereby the hotel operator and the restaurant on the site will provide the core of the meal services at the site for the refugee clients. There is some flexibility built into that contract that allows the program operator to bring in external catering for at least one meal a day. And we will continue to work on what that looks like with the community, with SSHA, the shelters, and the program operator to ensure that it is effectively rolled out throughout the term of the agreement.
Just a clarification, Allison, I think that you said that the contract could be arranged so that one meal a day could be provided. And
Jane, thanks for clarifying. It is one meal a week.
A week.
Thank you, Jane.
Yep, important. Okay, great. Thank you very much, Allison. I'm sure we'll hear from you again with Q&A. Back to Sharon for a little bit more detail on the program at the proposed shelter. You are
More
muted.
about-
There you go.
Did you unmute me?
No, you're good. You're good.
I'm good? Okay, thank you.
Yep.
Sorry about that. If you see here, if you can see that there is this image in the slide deck, and that's what one of the rooms look like at the Three Park Home Avenue. This refugee shelter program will support approximately 600 to 700 refugees and refugee claimants. These units will provide as much needed safe place for individuals and families to settle and begin their lives in Canada. The site will open to refugees beginning on September 6th with 50 rooms and ramp up on a weekly basis. I just wanted to add that 10% of the rooms that we have available will be used for program and staff office use. We will have some rooms available for singles, but the majority of the rooms of the space there will be for refugee families. And we're hoping that clients will begin transitioning to the site on September 6th and do it with about 50 rooms, and then we'll slowly ramp up the site on a weekly basis. Ramp up schedule, we're hoping to add 26 rooms per week until the end of October based on the need. We're still having conversations with a potential site operator. Those conversations are ongoing. And once we've selected to work with them, we are going to definitely engage the counselor. I'm sure that they would be happy to meet with you for you to go to one of their programs so that you can learn more about their specific program. Support services provided. Park Home will provide emergency shelter and support services for refugee claimants and families. That includes, but is not limited to, 24-hour staffing support, meal program serving high quality food, supported counseling for all phases of the settlement process, including the refugee determination and landing processes, assistance in secure and appropriate housing, referrals to culturally appropriate community supports, case coordination with legal services, assistant access in employment and educational programs, including employment training and post-secondary programs. We will also provide a number of support services, including recreational and social activities and programming to engage clients, children and youth, on-site primary care health supports, orientation sessions and monthly tenant meetings, coordination with external service providers for individual needs, community outreach, follow-up support after the client leaves the shelter. Just wanted to clarify here, when we talk about monthly tenant meetings, it's really clients because they're not tenants. Just wanted to clarify that. Apologies there.
Okay.
SSHA, in terms of collaboration with the community, SSHA will be working collaboratively with various city divisions community agencies and facilities to maximize opportunities to support the needs of the new clients of Three Park Home, including but not limited to Toronto Public Library, Toronto Parks and Recreation, such as the Douglas Snow Aquatic Center, TO Live at the Meridian Arts Center, North York Arts, and anything that's, North York Arts, and that appropriate funding will be provided for these purposes. SSHA will be working collaboratively with community organizations to meet the emotional and spiritual needs of the residents of Three Park Home. SSHA will provide regular briefings to and consultation with the local councillor on the operations at Three Park Home, including opportunities for improvement and to address any issues which may arise. And we're also going to work with the program operator and local businesses to procure locally where possible.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you very much, Sharon. I'm just going to go over a few details about the community engagement program. My job, in next slide, is to convene, to make space for people to ask questions, air concerns, get answers. We often talk in community engagement about what is up for influence. And in this case, the siting of the shelter is not something that you would say is up for influence. That, as explained previously, these are the sorts of things that the city is empowered to do. But of course, people may want to have things to say about that, and we're here to capture that. But we'll try to be really clear about what in fact can be done as part of the community engagement process. First and foremost, it's clearly this opportunity, is the first for you to meet as a community, at least virtually, and ask questions. And in many people in their questions already sent in an email, we're wondering, why is this happening so fast? It's a really good question, and we'll be putting that to the staff right away. I mean, this seemed to come out of nowhere for people, and even if they support the project in some ways, conceptually, they're pretty surprised at how fast it's happened. So that's the sort of thing that, community engagement, a space for people to, come together respectfully and ask questions that we're trying to do here. So we'll have this meeting. We're having another meeting on July 27th. We're monitoring and responding to questions and concerns and capturing feedback via the Gmail account that you see on the slide, 3parkhomeav@gmail.com. We'll be updating the website with more information. Eventually, if there's interest, we will establish a community advisory committee that sort of helps integrate the shelter services into the neighborhood and acts as a two-way vehicle for people to communicate to the shelter and the shelter to communicate back to the community. Probably we will send out a newsletter briefings on email, just like a very simple PDF with updates. If there's an interest in having that, we are really certainly motivated to communicate and get information and facts out as soon as we can. But it's pretty simple. So we're here to make that space and convene it. And my job is to be a neutral person that, makes that space. So next slide. This is information about the second information session. It's all available on the website as well. You can contact us at any time in between the meetings with your questions and comments. So let's just get into the Q&A period. Next slide, where we can, start getting into the questions. So I think we're making very good time. We kept to basically a half an hour of presentation times and slides. You have figured out absolutely the Q&A button already, because we've got many questions received already and many questions received in advance. So I think I'm just going to remind you that you can raise your hand now to ask a question, and you'll be in a queue. But also, I think I'm going to start by reading a few of the questions off the Q&A that we've also got variations on from the email in advance. So this question I'm going to ask leads to the terms of the lease. Many people were wondering, things like, who decides if the lease goes ahead, and how does the public have input? Of course, we've heard some of that information in the presentations already, but there's a sort of a lot of people are a bit anxious about knowing whether this could be converted into a homeless shelter. And, can they be assured that this shelter service will remain a refugee shelter service and not a homeless shelter? Could I ask that one of the city staff sort of jump in on that? Because that seems to be a really urgent question that a number of people have asked. And I'm not sure if Allison Folisea wants to pick that one up, or Kiefer or Loretta. Who wants to take that one?
Thanks, Jane. Maybe I can start off with the first half of the question and then pass it over to Loretta or Sharon on the second half. So the first half of the question is, how does this lease get approved, and is there an opportunity for the city, for the community to comment on the lease itself? We are currently seeking council authority on the terms of the lease. And so it has, as the councillor mentioned at the outset, it is currently on the agenda for the council session that starts tomorrow. It was presented at the General Licensing Committee, I think about a week ago. Those are typically the opportunities when community members have the chance to speak to things that are seeking council authority. But again, the best way to make your comments known about the lease itself is to reach out to your councillor. And as you have heard today, the councillor is extremely engaged on managing the authorities that we are seeking. In terms of what is the future of this site, I would pass it over to SSHA to respond to that question.
And specifically, people want to know, can it be converted to a homeless shelter instead of a refugee shelter? Great. Is that for Loretta or?
I can take this on, Jane.
Okay, Suhal, yeah.
So there are no plans to convert this site into a shelter for single individuals experiencing homelessness in the future. The city is specifically requesting this site to respond to the ongoing demand for temporary accommodation from refugees and refugee claimants. To which I allude back to the presentation, we had seen an increase for 1,100 over the last 9 months. Given current trends, the city does not anticipate this demand to change in the near future. The program will help support these new arrivals and also free up space in our base shelter system, and allowing us to support more homeless individuals in our base shelter system. If the demand were to change, SSHA can reallocate others from other sites that we're using for refugees to this site to ensure that we're maximizing the agreement for this site. The agreement for this site also includes rights to allow it to be canceled if there is another extraordinary circumstance like the COVID-19 pandemic, which had resulted in us closing the borders and led to the conversion of 1,500 young to another site. We don't anticipate this happening again. As I stated, we do anticipate demand continuing to be strong for refugee services in the future. But Allison, I don't know if you want to speak to it, but there are rights within the contract about how we can exit this agreement.
I think that would be of interest to people. And so, before you go, can you just say who you are? Because I didn't introduce you yet already. Who you work with?
Jane, I'm the manager of planning and engagement at Shelter Support and Housing Administration.
Great. Loretta, do you want to pick up on that last point?
Jane, I think it's Allison. I think I can pick up on the point about early termination rights that the city does have. And as Suhal noted, is that in the event there is a unique change in the refugee demand coming into the country. For example, we're just coming out of a situation where the borders were closed for a significant period of time, significantly changing the need for refugee services. We have the opportunity to end the contract and turn these rooms back to typical hotel purposes. We have a similar right around the fact that we are using federal funding to support entering into this contract. And if there was ever a time when that funding came to an end, we would have a similar right to bring this agreement to an end.
Okay, thank you.
Jane, I'm going to add a few things, starting with those changes that Allison just enunciated were worked out cooperatively between staff and myself as a result of some concerns and questions that came from the community. So just so people know, we are listening and making changes where we can. I do want to address the issue of could this be turned into a homeless shelter, because I've had, I would say it's the most common question I have received, and the origins of it was the switch at 5800 from a refugee center to a homeless shelter. The reasons for that, that was due to highly unusual circumstances where you had a steady stream of refugees, and it was certainly intended that that would be refugee housing for as long as that site existed, until the developer wanted to tear the building down, which is not too long from now, I believe. But because of the pandemic, the number of refugees basically stopped. And at the same time, there was both an increase in homelessness and a need to create more space between people so that COVID wouldn't spread like crazy in the shelters. So it was due to very unusual circumstances that happened. There is no reason to expect that to be repeated. I am of the belief that this is a good location for refugee families. I think just as much as that it is not a suitable location as a homeless shelter, primarily because it is much, much too big for that. And I would have a lot of concerns with that. I have had several conversations with city staff who have assured me, both privately and publicly, that it is not their intention. They do not expect that to happen, that it is for primarily for refugee families. There may be some single refugees, but primarily families. When I asked about, so I just want to be clear, I can tell people there's no intention to house people who are homeless here. And the answer I got back, well, what if it was homeless families? And my answer, and I hope what all of your answers would be, is of course that would be appropriate. There are families who, due to economic conditions, who due to domestic violence, have to, find themselves without homes, including families with young children who would not be in favor of providing them with safe, secure, temporary housing while they are able to look for something else. To complete the answer, if someone says, is it possible that this could someday be a shelter? And I just want to make sure that this isn't taken out of context or misconstrued. Not expecting that to ever happen, but technically, legally, could it happen? It could. I don't expect it to ever happen. And I'm sure whoever the counselor of the day is, it won't be me. I'm leaving office November 15th, but I'm sure would, if they have good relations with their colleagues and city staff and the mayor, can have a lot of influence over making sure that this site is always used appropriately.
Thank you, everyone. Okay, so we're going to go to a question asked on audio by someone who's got their hand up. By the way, there's 140 people in attendance, so this is definitely a well-attended meeting. and we have dozens of questions to get to in the Q&A and email. So Marcus, we're going to unmute you. You've got your hand up. And don't identify yourself other than that's your first name, but we had to say that you're live. You've got the floor. Please ask a question or comment, make a comment.
Hi, Jane. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah, perfect.
I appreciate the opportunity to speak tonight. I guess I just want to come at this principally as a resident, express that I think in principle, this is the right thing to do. I think that if we are going to solve housing affordability issues in the city, we need to be involving neighborhoods right across the city. But that having been said, I am very concerned about how the communication process has worked on this, how we've been engaging residents from the beginning. Allison made the point about residents being able to go to committee to engage with counselors and express concerns. Well, if the notice doesn't go out, before a staff report gets dropped 5 days ahead of time, it's not giving people a whole lot of notice. It's not creating a sense of a whole lot of transparency. And as important as I think this is, I think there are very legitimate questions to be asked. The big one I have relates to schooling. If we're going to have 600, 700 people in this facility, most of them families, many young kids, where are those kids going to go to school? What is the impact going to be on the local schools with kids coming in and out? We've heard nothing about that tonight. That would seem to be a really important detail. So to be dealing with this in a community where there has been that big change at 5800 Yonge a few years ago, there is already that question of trust that is on the table. These are important things to do, but they are not easy things to do. And I think, building the trust with communication in the community is a huge part of it. Getting all of those issues on the table, making sure that there are clear processes and answers for dealing with those is important so that we can say yes with confidence and feel good about that as we move forward.
Great. Excellent questions, Marcus. The point about the schools did come up briefly in the presentation, but I'm going to focus on that, but also expand to get a sense of your bigger question, which is like, how could this possibly have happened in the space of a few weeks that, the community was notified about this significant development? We heard that question many times in the Q&A and on email. So the first part is schools. How will the schools be able to absorb and accommodate the children that are coming? Let's throw that one. I believe would that be Loretta who is best able to answer that one? Or Sharon?
I can take it.
Sharon, okay.
Yeah, I can take that. Thank you for that question. And certainly it is a really important question. We know that when, refugee families access our shelter programs, it's a significant adjustment to their lives in a new community as well as schools. And they may not understand, how schools function and how to access supports, have little familiarity with the curriculum or social mores, and may have difficulty making friends. So we have made contact with the Toronto District School Board and the Toronto Catholic District School Board to help support the children and youth that will be at the site to smoothly transition into their new schools and community. Transparently, we've heard back from the Toronto District School Board, and they have shared that they are able to support the new location, and we're waiting to hear back from the Toronto Catholic District School Board.
Great, thank you, Sharon.
I'm just going to jump in on that, Jane, unless someone else wants to add to it. I have engaged both school boards, both through the school trustees and at least one of the boards through senior staff. As very soon, probably next week, when the council meeting is over and I have a few days time, I will be engaging with the two school trustees and the staff, in addition to whatever meetings that the city staff may be having. I will be pleasantly surprised if there is enough accommodation in the local schools. There is certainly some accommodation at some schools, but generally speaking, they're pretty full. We will, I think, realistically not be able to know a whole lot until we see who arrives, what age group the students are, what religion they are, what their level of English is, et cetera, et cetera. And there will need to be a lot of time spent between now and September on developing a plan. Fortunately, both school boards are, have been through this before, and they have a way of doing it. There will be some local school accommodation, but I won't be surprised if it's also necessary to have some students travel outside of Willowdale by bus to where there is more accommodation. I will also not be surprised if for some students, depending on their age, it will also be helpful to provide some ESL on site. And if it's very young children, to perhaps have childcare programs on site. So there's a whole lot of work to be done over the next couple of months to make sure this all goes smoothly. And I think everybody on the call here is committed to make that happen.
Great. Thank you. The second part of that, again, this has been asked by many people in the Q&A and email, which is how is it possible that this has happened so quickly? I know it was touched on a little bit in the presentation, but I think it's a nice, clear, succinct question. How could something of this scope and significance happen so fast and the community be really behind the 8 ball and finding out? Who wants to handle that one?
I will
All
jump
right,
in
Loretta,
on this
thank
one.
you.
The one time you don't say my name, Jane. So we knew, as was mentioned earlier in the presentation, that we were seeing an increase quite rapidly through the first part of this year of new individuals entering our shelter system as refugee claimants. We asked our partners in corporate real estate management to engage in a search, which was done quite rapidly. So as much as I understand the individual was concerned and understandably upset that we didn't really connect much far in advance of the General Government and Licensing Committee date. It was really such because we didn't have a lot of lead time ourselves to do so. CREM sort of worked on going back to a list of landlords and potential properties that may or may not have been available. This one was, and then they worked rapidly to draft a report. And once that was finalized, that was when we were prepared to sort of come out to the community, which unfortunately wasn't much lead time in advance of GGLC.
So turns out the city sometimes moves fast. What do you know?
Yeah.
It's not what's normal, but obviously the circumstances were quite dire in terms of making arrangements for refugees to land. But people are just asking. It's a good question, and wow, it acted fast, it acted rapidly, and the decision's not quite made yet. So
yeah, and the other thing, and the councillor touched on this briefly, like we had a condensed timeline before the blackout for the election period started, and we needed to make this council meeting, whereas under other circumstances, we might have spread things out a little bit just to have given time to more appropriately engage.
Thank you, Loretta. All right, we're going to go to another
Just
person.
for Dave, just for those who weren't here at the beginning of the meeting, I know people have come in since. So I only learned about this hours before the agenda dropped for a committee. I just happened to be putting out a newsletter that day, and so let everybody know in the newsletter. And I know certainly not everybody in the community gets my e-newsletter. Everyone is welcome to get it. It is the only way I have of getting information out to people very quickly. I put those out once a week at the moment, and if anybody wants to sign up for those for ongoing information, because it's just very difficult to do other than electronically, then please do so. Send me an email and we'll add you to the list. And as I said at the beginning, if we need to put this decision off for a month, not that there's likely to be any change in the decision. What's up for grabs here is the lease itself. That's what's before council. But to make sure that everybody's questions are answered, everybody's concerns are heard, that we get as much in place as possible, which may or may not involve changing the terms of the lease, then we will do that.
It's very significant, that development, Councillor, I think. So I'm glad that you've been able to repeat it there. All right, we're going to go to another question from someone with their hand up. Her name is Christine. Christine, you have the floor. Hello. You are able to speak now, Christine, if you are there. We'll come back to you. We're going to go next down the line, and the person called Hyun is, if you're able to speak, Hyun, you have your hand up. We're listening.
Yeah, are you okay? Can you hear me?
Yes, absolutely. Hear you very clearly.
Okay, my name is Hyunju Chai from KCBA. I have around 80 members in this area. So my question is, so Novotel is only one hotel in this area.
Yeah.
If we have a couple of them, yes. But we have only one with many offices.
Yeah.
And visitors and tourists for summer.
Mhm.
So what do you think about damages and the impact for business, for development in this area?
Yeah, and we've heard this question. Thank you so much, Hyun. We heard this question many times in the chat. Basically, local residents depend on using this hotel when they have family visiting, friends visiting, or businesses that use the meeting rooms, that put up business travelers. So it has an impact on the neighborhood because this is an important amenity for many people. What can be done about these negative impacts that the local residents and businesses may experience? Who wants to, and why, why would Novotel want to do this? I don't know if that's an Allison question. Who wants to speak to that first?
I can start off, Jane, in terms of why Novotel, and then I may pass it off to Sharon or Loretta to just talk about the larger engagement around community impacts. So back in mid-COVID, the city, as part of our COVID response, set out a request for interests to the broader hotel community across the city, asking for any hotels that were interested in accommodating shelter or city uses in a variety of ways. And Novotel in March of 2021 had initially put their hand up to say, we're interested, we think that this is a really great opportunity. And then since then, the city has engaged with ongoing discussions about whether there was opportunity, whether there's need, how we could come together. And so I think the answer from a Novotel perspective is that this was really, they were interested as a good opportunity, a good business opportunity
for them.
For them.
Yeah.
From a city perspective, it's one of the most feasible and most economic deals we have been able to come to an agreement on in most recent times.
Right.
I may pass it over to Suhal now to talk about local business engagement.
Thank you.
Thanks, Allison. Yes, as Allison said, this was the best opportunity for us in terms of housing the refugees. As previously stated, we've increased a significant increase in demand for refugee services. We recognize that the conversion of this hotel from hotels open to everyone to one that's specific to refugee and refugee claimants is a change and a challenge for the community. So we are committed to working with the community, engaging with local businesses and local organizations to see where we can find opportunities to collaborate. As Alison previously mentioned, while we are get catering for 6 days a week, there is an opportunity to get catering for the remaining 1 day a week. So we can look for opportunities with local businesses to see how we can best support, engage them as part of that process. We also continuously work with them to see where else we can align the needs of the refugees with the needs of the community to look for opportunities to collaborate.
Great. I'm going to pick up it on, yes, Councillor.
Just on that point, Chai, as I mentioned in the meeting with the BIA, that I am certainly pushing for a lot more interaction with local businesses, and I am not satisfied with 1 meal a week. I think there can be a lot more opportunities for local businesses, especially local food preparation businesses, to both provide some meals going into the building, and also I think there should also be opportunities for the residents to, using basically the same cost to the city or close to the same cost to the city, be able to have some meals outside of the Novotel. So I am intending to make some amendments to the terms of the lease to that effect.
Great. Yeah, thank you. Yeah, there was a lot of questions about that sort of procurement piece, like is there opportunity to bring economic prosperity to the neighborhood with this? But those are very helpful answers in terms of why Novotel, who drove it. They came forward and offered themselves. It does have impacts in the community, but it was Novotel's decision to ultimately put themselves forward as that service. I wanted to actually ask a few more nitty-gritty questions about operations that are coming up in the chat and on the email. And maybe I think this will probably be for Sharon, but like people are wondering, can people stay at the refugee shelter for 5 years? If there's a 5-year lease, are they allowed to stay there? What are the incentives for people to move into housing, and how do the operations work that try to move people through the system as opposed to having them be there a long time?
Great question. From my my experience over the years, and especially with the work that our refugee specific servant programs, the work and their experience, refugee families and claimants, they tend to, on average, we may be at the hotel program between maybe 3 months. They want to come in
3 months.
Yeah, in some
Wow.
cases, 3 months, over, pre-pandemic. Certainly over the pandemic, it might have looked a bit different, but certainly, they're here. They really, once they get connected to the resources that they need, they primarily want to move out into the community. They tend to go to communities where they may have family, or where, this is a great city that we live in. So we tend to have lots of different diverse communities within the city. And some of our families tend to go within those communities. And so we don't find that on average that refugee claimants stay, years in our shelter program. The providers that we're working with, they have a lot of experience with housing, ensuring that they have, housing workers to really focus and support these families. And so I don't anticipate that, we would have families there for the full 4 or 5 years. Of course, there's some unique situations, but definitely overall, I would say that, our housing outcomes within this community tends to be quite high.
Great, thank you. Okay, we're going to go back to the phone lines. We're going to try for Christine again. We missed you on the first round. Christine, can you voice your question now?
Hello?
Yep, we got you.
Hi.
We can hear you.
Yes,
Yeah.
hi. Thank you for taking my question.
Yeah.
So I'm just wondering how you will, I've worked in shelters before, and I know that it's quite distressing having couples in a room. A lot of them end up splitting up. And, sharing a hotel room is really distressing, especially as a family, especially if you have experienced a lot of trauma. and you don't have that space, how will that be accounted for in the shelters? And also, will you have enough settlement workers? Like how many caseworkers will you have? That's my question.
Yeah, there's another one for you, Sharon. And great question. Again, we're hearing people concerned about how the activations will work, how the amenity space in the hotel could be used for social spaces and so on. So Sharon, great questions.
Thank you. I can take that as well. What I, again, from experience as well, given my role and previous work that I've done, we have families similar in our regular shelter programs. Usually it's a, a self-contained room. In some cases, the hotel space, they have their own amenities in there. We try not to, if there's like a mom and 3 kids, so of course, mom and perhaps in the 2 double spaces, that would be a mom and, 3 kids. If it's a larger family, we make sure that they're in a double, they have like 2 rooms, depending on their family size. But more importantly, we work with our community partners to ensure that they are in receipt of services so that they're not in the space. It's easy for folks to come, they're nervous, like you mentioned around trauma. They don't want to, go out into the community, and the work that's being done by our refugee servant program, certainly they're the experts here, and they ensure that they liaise with different providers in the community. Around the second part of the question, I think it has to do with the housing workers. Our standard is really, we say, one housing counselor to 20 families, and a family size could be a mom and 1, or it could be a mom and 4, a bit larger. In those cases, then it could be around like maybe 1 to 15, but definitely the funding with this provider would include housing workers.
Christine, I thank you for the question, because it helped dispel the myth that I've got in some emails, like, why are you, spending all this money to provide luxury accommodation for people? And, it is anything but luxury accommodation. Imagine yourself with your 3 kids in a very, quite a small hotel room with 2 beds for the 4 of you, and you can see why people are are highly motivated to find work, find another place to live, and not be staying in the Novotel, even though it's a nice place. But in the very tight quarters, I think one of the first things I did was to go for a tour of the facility, and saw a lot of spaces where there could be a lot of really interesting programs. There is a swimming pool, for example, and I am committed to making sure that that pool can be operational with swimming lessons for kids, and swim programs, and make sure it's all very safely done, bring in all the proper staff and lifeguards and everything like that. I reached out immediately to the Meridian Arts Center, and they said, we're really glad to help with, providing tickets for people, or, having different events in the Arts Center. I reached out to North York Arts, and they said, count on us. We're very interested in providing arts programming, so I can see, musicians coming in, especially musicians from some of the countries that the refugees are from, who can both play music that they're familiar with. Maybe some of them will be musicians as well, but also talk to them about their days as newcomers to Canada, and how it's rough at first, but how well people can be integrated. So there's a whole lot of things, and as soon as we have a provider, there are a lot of people reaching out to me saying, how can we help? How can we get involved? Both individuals and faith organizations. So really good question. And I think this is a location where we can really make sure that there is a lot for people to do, so that they're not just cooped up in a small room all the time.
Thank you. Thank you, Councillor. All right, we're going to go to another live question from Raymond, who is able to be heard. Raymond, can you say your question or comment? Are you there, Raymond? Okay. We are going to go to the next person on the list. We'll come back in case Raymond is able to engage. Lily is on the line. Lily, you have the floor with a question or comment.
Hi, so my name is Lily and I have two questions. One is, what are the plans for supporting neighborhood engagement with refugees? There is a lot of infrastructure that is required to be able to safely deploy volunteers. And I think we live in a very kind and generous neighborhood. But I am concerned about just if there is actual funding allocation for that aspect, because we did see with 5800, when it was a refugee shelter, there wasn't very much community involvement other than donation requests that people quickly provided. So that would be the first question. And in general, just we're talking about Douglas Snow, we're talking about library programs. Well, I know as a mom in the community that when I go to these places, they're quite full. Like, it's not like there's a lot of empty rooms. So I'm curious,
Okay.
Funding allocation for that. And the last question I have is, why has the city not committed to the same community engagement process for 5800 Yonge Street, which is equally, if not even more so needed? I hear regularly that there are women who are being harassed, assaulted, and frightened in our neighborhood, and there's no clear feedback loop, no safety town hall, no discussion like this one where we can be informed of timelines and processes and have our concerns met. So these
right.
are my questions.
That's
I just want to jump in to say it is really unhelpful to conflate a homeless shelter, which is a completely different population from a refugee center. And
I'm not conflating. I'm just simply saying that, we are really grateful that this process has been built out for this shelter. But as community members, we would be very grateful that a similar process was adopted for the other shelter, because the shelter is not happening in a vacuum. We're all in one community and we would all like to be participatory to both shelter processes.
All right, so let me actually just dive in there. So Lily, I'm not able to comment, of course, about 5800 Yonge. I'm working on this project, but I'm glad that you're acknowledging that this has started. Prior to your comment and question, there was some details on some of the elements of the engagement plan and the community, participation that's taking place. I believe it will be critical, first and foremost, to get an operator in place if this program is approved, to answer those questions in more detail. I can throw it over to Sharon to confirm that, but Sharon, is it reasonable to assume that whatever plans fall into place or are created for this, it's a matter of being led by the shelter operator first and foremost?
Absolutely, that is correct. And, as I've mentioned, the providers that we're engaging with, it happened to be, it was over the holidays, people were on vacation, so that created a bit of delay. But certainly these are well-established programs and have done an amazing job over the years. And so I'm pretty sure that they would be looking as well to engage with community agencies around programming, as you mentioned. And so we'll give you more information as we know more.
Great.
Just a little bit more. I know we're not talking about 5800 Yonge, but just since it unfortunately got raised. So that is a development site. The developer now has their approvals. They are starting to get that, or soon will be getting that site ready for redevelopment. I would be surprised if they aren't wanting their building back by next spring sometime. Always glad to discuss with anyone what's going on there, as is Homes First. But it really bothers me when people sort of manufacture these stories about crime or whatever, that can get people all afraid of shelters, whether it's the shelter at 5800 or especially a refugee shelter. It's just not helpful.
Okay.
Jane, I could add the fact that before opening 5800 Yonge, we did do a consultation process and engagement with the community. At that time, we worked close with the councillor to really focus on making a welcoming space for refugees. Councillor helped us rename the site to the Willdale Welcome Center, and we did an in-person info session. Do recognize that the current use of the shelter is different from what original engagement process, and it is now being used for singles in general. The reason we weren't able to communicate that was we had converted that at the time when we were opening 40 different sites across the city to respond to the COVID-19 pandemic and create distancing in the shelter system. We recognized that that was not the best way to approach with the lack of engagement. And since that time, we have been making efforts to engage the community as best we can to help address some of the concerns being raised at that site.
Thank you. I want to actually pick up on the safety issue because we have seen a lot of questions about it in the chat and again on the email that we received in advance of the meeting. So just to segue, picking up a little bit on Lily's point, whether the city staff feel that this is a rational response or not to the service that's being proposed, I really want you to hear and empathize with the fact that many people in the community are just frightened. And it may be because they don't understand or don't know what is being proposed here, but I just really want to make a space for people who have very respectfully simply asked, are there safety concerns? Is there a safety plan? I'm just kind of paraphrasing a few questions. The presence of the shelter has had a very negative effect on my neighborhood. I worry about my safety and my children. Can I walk around at night? So I just want to say that, these are really very typical questions that people would have with shelter services arriving in their community. And, they're seeking assurance really for whether this is going to be an issue, and if it is, how it will be addressed. So it's a completely reasonable question. How does the city approach safety and security with issues related to shelter, homeless, refugee, or otherwise? Who wants to take that one? Suhal?
Sure, I can take that on. As the City of Toronto is always committed to the safety of both community residents as well as the residents within the shelter space. We work closely with our operator partners as well as the local community and local councillor to identify any potential issues, especially pertaining to safety, and try to address them the best we can. From our experience, I don't think refugee sites have had many complaints around community safety. I think they have been relatively more of our quieter sites, but if there are any potential concerns, we are happy to work with community members to identify any solutions. We recognize there are challenges at some of our other sites, and we are looking for opportunities to work with the community to find a solution to those issues as well.
Thank you. That's
Jane, I might
Yep.
just jump in on that to add just a few more details. As part of the lease contract, and as any part of opening sites of this nature, security is a critical component. As Suhal mentioned, security overall is both a reflection of community engagement and socialization around what this use looks like and how it impacts sort of day-to-day use, but security itself is also a critical part. The city typically offers security services for shelter sites and sites of this nature directly through the city's own security guards. But in this specific site, we are in regular discussions right now with the hotel operator, their security services that provide security for the entire complex, because we do want to make sure that any security that is in place understands the site, understands the community. So that is one place where we're trying to recognized what's in place right now. Is there a better way to do to provide the services that we would typically provide for this specific site than how we have approached this issue in the past?
Great. Thank you, Allison. I'd like to go to someone else. We're at 7:50. We have 40 minutes left. We're making some headway on the speaking list, but and a bunch of sort of distilled questions. But Raymond is next in the queue with their hand up. Raymond, you have the floor. Are you able to speak, Raymond?
Hello.
Yeah.
Hi. I'm Raymond Jean, and I'm wondering about the contract, and also with the possibility of this going back into converted to a homeless shelter. If you go to www.toronto.ca/WP-content/upload-2018-983D-2018. Basically that's the 331 _5800 -young -street ST PDF, right? And that's basically the delegated approval form for the rental of 5800 Yonge. If you go to page 4 on the terms and condition, under use, it states, for the purpose of allowing the city to operate a temporary shelter for the homeless newcomers to Canada. The property may also be used for other ancillary purpose, including office space, storage space, and public parking. The building.
Okay, so I mean, I'm sorry, I'm just going to actually interrupt you there because this is a great question. And I have to say, Raymond, we have answered it in quite a bit of detail, but I'm going to, for the sake of clarity, it's a great question and many people have asked it in various ways. So Councillor Filion, I'm going to ask you to respond simply by, again, for the sake of clarity, could this be used as a homeless shelter, even though it's being set up as a refugee settlement center now?
So the answer is technically yes. Is there any reason to expect that to happen? No. What happened at 5800 is an anomaly, and I have received staff assurances that they would not consider this a suitable site as a homeless shelter, and there is no thought whatsoever to change it in that way. That's a shorter answer of the one I gave previously.
Thank you very much, Councillor. I mean, I'm just in the interest of getting to the many people here. I'm just looking for new questions. And I'd actually, well, I'm going to open it up to a gentleman by the name of Martin. You have the floor with a quick question or comment. Martin, you are able to speak now if you have your microphone on.
Yes, I've just unmuted. You should be able to.
I can hear you. I got you now. You can be heard.
Good stuff. Thank you. I appreciate the time to be able to ask the question. I do have another question, and that is this. There are many refugees that are being brought to this site, and what measures are being taken to check for diseases that any of these individuals may be bringing to the site above and beyond COVID, please.
Okay, great question. But we have other questions about public health, COVID, things like that. I think that's probably going to get us back to Sharon. How will people be screened for medical conditions and frankly offered medical care who are at the shelter? There you go.
Outside of, can you hear me? Yes. Outside of COVID, we do not screen folks for medical conditions to access our programs in our shelters. If they come, and we do work closely with our partners over at Public Health, but also in the community as well. One of the first things that we're able to do is ensure that, you know, the family, whether they're refugee or not, is able to be connected to, health providers within the community if they don't have a doctor.
Great. Excellent. I want to go to the next person on the speaker list. Their initial is LL. You have the floor, LL. Can you speak?
Yes, I can. Can you hear me well?
Yeah, we can hear you
Okay.
clearly.
Yes, thank you for the opportunity. I just looked at the mathematics just now, saying that it will be paid, the city is paying $9 million plus for the first year for this contract.
Yeah.
And for this hotel, as far as I understand, it is 270 rooms. So if I do the math correctly, it will be around $34,000 per year per room. And that will be average about $28.41 per month per room. It is a very expensive way of accommodating our refugees. This is fair value for a 3-star hotel like Novotel. It is in the core North York downtown. Do we Canadians have to accommodate our refugees so luxuriously? Is there any other accommodation to accommodate them? This is the first question. And the second one, I agree with a lot of attendees here that the communication has not been done well. I live in this area, and just now I hear that Councillor Bullion say that he has just got the news not long ago, and he sent out the communication through his newsletter. I want to point out that this area has a lot of rental units. The owners do not live here. The communication is not done very well. If you just go to the community here, have to go through the city folk to reach all the off-site owners, because it is very, very, this will be of their interest to know this happening in the community, in their investment.
Okay.
And I want the third thing I want to point out.
I want to hold you right there. That's two questions.
No. One more, just one more. This hotel is connected to a very core center. It is connected to many condos nearby through the passageway.
Can you make your question or comment?
Yeah. Okay. So I have 3 here. So maybe I hope somebody will address them, not right now, but down the road. It is very important that they communicate with all the owners here, not just the residents, not just those here, but because the rent is here.
Okay, I think I've got it. And you know what? Thank you very much for making that point. It's actually a super important point that communicating to the community really matters, whether you own a building or you are currently renting in the building. So again, with more time and more lead time, that would be a lot easier. We have discussed during this meeting how this timeline has been very compressed, which has created problems around communication and engagement. And your concerns are shared by many, including even the councillor in that regard. So noted. Hopefully we have a bit more runway on this, and also, of course, notifying people who own units is very important. But I want to actually get the city staff to respond specifically to your also very good question, which is this an economically efficient way to provide these services? If you actually, which is brilliant, you're just sort of chopping it down into the crass numbers, the math, room divided by $9 million. Does this make economic sense? This is exactly what the city should be asking. So thank you for bringing it up in such clear terms. I'm going to throw that over to the hot seat of Allison Folisea from Corporate Real Estate to go, is this good bang for the buck for the city? And, the feds are paying the bill, but come on, is this really an efficient use of money?
Yeah, thanks, Jane. And it is a really good question. And it is something that is always on our mind when we're assessing how best to address demand. I can, as I tend to do, I will speak specifically on this contract, but I will also throw it over to Loretta or Sinead to talk a little bit about the different tools SSHA uses in addressing refugee services, because providing space through a hotel contract is just one of the tools that SSHA uses. And they've got, and Sharon may be able to be the better, SSHA will answer, but the hotel is only one of the tools, and there are other avenues that the city uses to be able to provide and support refugees coming into the city. So I think that that's important to keep in mind. This is only one avenue that we use. With respect to hotels, as Loretta had mentioned, when we were trying to address the current need, it was finding a space that we could activate very quickly. We didn't have the runway to be able to identify a new space to build or to renovate another space. So the hotel opportunities were really top of mind in order to address the need that we have. From a hotel perspective, this is actually quite an economic deal. And it's economic because of the term that we're able to commit to. If we had said that we're only committing to 1 year, we would have seen our daily rates go up significantly, as well as our catering costs on a daily basis go up. So by taking a long-term view to the site, by focusing on the hotel structure as just one tool, we believe that this is a really economic and effective solution for addressing part of the demand that SSHA is trying to address. I'll pass it over to Sharon then to address the other opportunities, the other things that SSHA uses.
Great.
Thank you, Alison. Yeah, just wanted to add that earlier this year, we recognized, and we mentioned it at the top of the presentation around, we saw an increase as the borders reopened, we saw an increase in folks seeking asylum. And so we engaged with 3 different partners earlier this year around, I think it was March or April. And so we have recently acquired contracts. One of those programs is really around shelter diversion, working with refugee claimants and families to ensure that they don't get into the shelter system, and through the use of, providing housing work. And so that's a really good, to date, they've diverted about 300 folks from coming into our shelter system. So that's a really good outcome.
Excellent. Thank you very much. Let's just keep churning through the questions here. We have Jeff Jeff, can you speak? You are unmuted.
Hello.
Yeah, gotcha.
So I asked a number of questions in the chat. One of my questions has been answered and the rest have not. I'd still appreciate them to be answered.
Okay.
I wanted to vocally state, in my opinion, it's not the city's job to bail out selective businesses like the Novotel. The city has the responsibility to implement zoning throughout the city, and this is a major change and impact on businesses and residents in the area. The criteria used to select site needs improvement and transparency. My questions I asked in the chat related to this transparency. So I'm happy to repeat them now. I don't know if you want to cut me off and not answer the question.
So
right?
I'm just, we have 130 attendees. We have dozens and dozens of questions. So Jeff, in the interest of just sharing the floor, can you just be specific with one of your questions around transparency, which sounds like a very relevant topic? And you're noting that, a zoning is what's, under influence, up for influence with the city. What is it specifically you'd like to ask or comment on?
So one of the questions that I asked was, what is the study done on the impact to businesses in the area, and can it be shared? The loss of the only operating hotel in the area will have a significant impact on businesses in the area and residents in the area.
Okay, great question. And I want to echo that this has been asked in several different ways in the emails. What's the, losing this hotel is a loss to the neighborhood. What is the city able to do? How did that factor into any kind of decision? The BIA, I think, has weighed in on this as well. It's a thorny question. It's a good one. you know, who, is there someone who wants to field this one? I'm gonna just pick someone.
I'm gonna
Loretta.
start. I'll start because you were gonna pick me anyway, right?
Yeah, that's right.
When we're citing new spaces, one of the big things we have to look for is landlords actually being willing to work with us. As much as we might want to say this particular neighborhood or pocket would be best suited for a shelter, there may or may not be an available property to purchase or rent in that particular neighborhood. There are only so many hotels available throughout the city as well. And this was the one that the city could negotiate the best opportunity for, that was available for us to move on quickly. Are there impacts to the community? Of course, there always will be some impacts to the businesses, no matter where the hotel might be that we might take on and use. It's our hope that there continues to be services that, you know, the community would continue to have as well, like our residents, our citizens. They will become residents of the neighborhood as well, and continue to also use things like the local restaurants and local services that might be available there, that you know, the tourism aspect of using these hotels might actually bring in as well. That would be my short answer to start.
No, it's a good one, and there's probably not an easy answer. In any neighborhood, there's you know, deficiencies. I mean, you know, remember they used to talk about, you know, food deserts, like, you know, neighborhoods that were really underserviced in terms of grocery stores and stuff. I mean, I'm not, you know, taking away from the impact that this will have, but, you know, it's yeah, one door closes, another opens. It's not a welcome development for many, in the sense of the impact on hotel rooms available in the neighborhood. So maybe there will be other services that emerge that try to fill that gap. But I mean, ultimately, as you've covered in other places, this is something driven by Novotel itself that responded to the expression of interest. And but yeah, in fact, we have someone from the Willowdale BIA is actually up next in the speaker list. And maybe they will speak to this directly, but you have the floor, Willowdale BIA, if you want to speak now. Hello.
Hi,
BIA.
thank you for the opportunity to participate. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you now. Yep.
Great. I'm just having a little internet trouble, so I missed the last comment, but I did have a comment we wanted to convey.
Okay, we're all ears.
Thank you. Willowdale BIA is located along Yonge Street, north of the 401, in which the Novotel is located. The BIA is in favor of supporting refugee claimants in Toronto's neighborhoods and believes that welcoming refugees to Canada and the Willowdale community has the potential to be mutually beneficial and integrated. The Willowdale BIA is a board of the city which promotes and serves local businesses. It was mentioned during the call that the city is looking for ways to engage with local businesses. Many of these businesses in our large hospitality sector would have difficulty participating in a consultation at this time of day, which seems to be the only offering. The BIA itself only became aware of this proposal and these consultations through indirect means recently. So what our ask is, when can we expect the city to engage in a broader discussion directly with the BIA, especially regarding strategies to mitigate impacts on local economic recovery from COVID-19 and future development for tourism and business due to the absence of a hotel in the district?
So let me try that, Jane, and someone else can jump in if they want. Laura, I sent a letter to the BIA today. I don't know whether you saw it or not, but offering to set up a meeting I said as soon as possible, but I will say now next week. The board itself can let me know what a good time of day is, and we'll pick a day either next week or the week after, early in the week after, and engage staff in that kind of a discussion. As I said earlier, one of my goals here is to create as much business as possible for local businesses from the refugee center. I'm not entirely sure yet how to do that, and certainly welcome ideas coming from the BIA. So we will set up a meeting probably through you sometime in the near future.
That's great. If anyone else from the city wants to add to that, but it's a pretty direct response to when the BIA can expect to be engaged directly on this. Suhal, you want to say something you want to add?
Yeah, I just want to clarify that this information sessions are a great way for us to share information and to get some feedback from the community, but they aren't the only opportunity for us to engage with the community. They aren't the best way for us to have a conversation, have a discussion, and work through solutions. So that is a big role that Jane is helping us with. There's an email on our screen right now, and for those on the phone, it's 3 Park Home Avenue, Avenue spelled AVE @gmail.com. You can email Jane and she can help answer your questions. If you want to ask for a call to discuss some of the issues or concerns you're having, I think Jane's going to communicate if there's a need for a larger meeting with the city and with other stakeholders, including our operator. Once we have them, we can also help arrange that to have a more fulsome discussion. We want to make sure that engagement is an ongoing process. It's a conversation, and it's not only relegated to these one-time events.
Yeah.
Yes, and there will be, I certainly didn't mean to imply that the meeting with the BIA will be the only additional meeting. I expect a large number of them in the coming weeks and months.
Yeah, and I just one proviso, the Gmail account is there. I will do my best to get the questions, but I'm also just going to be directing people to the website where a lot more information and FAQs will be posted that will cover a lot of the questions we're anticipating and have received tonight. Let's go to the phones again we're not ready for closing remarks. No. Jennifer, you have the floor. Please. Yeah, there you are.
Yes, thank you so much for taking my question.
Yep.
Really appreciate it. So to my understanding so far, looks like the Novotel is the one of the very limited option that city can negotiate with. But I will ask if it's possible to let us know if there are other options that may be cheaper in some other area. Here is the prime location. I'm pretty sure this Novotel is not the cheapest one or most economic one. And the other thing also, so I understand this is a good business opportunity for Novotel, but I know this is a business for profit. But as a city, when you consider this decision, you probably want to take into consideration what is the impact for the local residents, right? And the other thing is that I echo what Lily said before. Willowdale is already very, very crowded in terms of either library or school. And never mind the school haven't have the issue haven't been resolved yet, like leave to later on for resolve. I'm pretty sure there's a lot of schools that have millions of seats available capacity. So I'm not sure why Willowdale. Yeah,
okay.
Thank you.
I'm going to thank you, Jennifer. I'm going to skip to the last question because we dealt in detail with, why Novotel, why this hotel, and the impact on the local community in the last few questions specifically. But I'm going to couple up your interest in the impact on schools and services being accessed with a question we've got in the Q&A, which is really asking about how people in the neighborhood can expect to, register their kids for swim classes and programs. They already have a lot of difficulty. Everyone knows it's very hard to get children into programs at community centers. So you know, in terms of capacity, impact on schools, we've talked about a little bit, but, you know, other people ask about, well, how's it going to impact the library? And this question we're getting by Q&A is, you know, so how will the influx of new young people and children affect the local community's access to existing City of Toronto services, like literally swim classes, schools, library spots? Who need one? I think it's a Sharon question, but it's a really good one, and we heard it in various ways. Thank you very much, caller, for that question. Other people are wondering the same sorts of things.
Yeah, and as I would say that over, you know, with the experience that we have working with our refugee servant programs, the average, as I mentioned, the average, you know, pre-pandemic, and again, you know, lots changed since then, but I believe that they have really good housing outcomes. And a lot of our refugees, families especially, you know, they may come in to access the shelter within that specific area, for example, but oftentimes they may not live there because they either have a family member that's, you know, in a different community. Some of them leave the city themselves and go to different, you know, surrounding regions as well. And so, yes, there will definitely be an impact initially, but I believe that families with our housing outcomes, they tend to move and live throughout the City of Toronto and surrounding communities.
Thank you. Okay, two more people on the speakers list, and then we're going to go to some final reflections. Marty, you have the floor.
Hey there. Thanks for taking my question, Jane. I think you're amazing navigating all of this. For sure, there are heated feelings, especially just becoming aware of all of these changes. I think in addition to all the schooling questions that have already been posed, because every time I run by a new condo, there is definitely a sign that says there are no space for your children should you buy a condo here in the area school. So it does come as quite a surprise. But more than that, I wonder, Mel Lastman Square is the sort of the heart of North York. It's the epicenter of North York. It has required like a facelift and some energy for many years. I know that Councillor Filion is creating Cultura Days on Fridays, etc. But living in this community my whole life, it is the hub of North York. So we're going to take the hub of North York, the only, as it's been stated multiple times, the only hotel that we have in our area, in our region, and we're going to create it as a refugee center. It just doesn't make sense. So what I'd like to hear is, if we have a 5-year lease program, what does that do to the potential of, really just exploring and creating Mel Lastman Square the best sort of celebration square that there could be?
Legit. I mean, a lot of people are really worried about this. I'm not sure, if anyone has anything to add from the panel, but, this is coming through as a very significant concern for the community. It obviously is going to come up with the BIA stakeholder meeting that is going to be teed up. Councillor, do you want to respond?
Sure. I'm not entirely clear on the concern about the square. It's a public square. Lots of people use it. It's nice and big. It's never crowded except on when there's a major event, Canada Day, even Cultura. It's not terribly crowded. It's full but not crowded. I don't see this as having any impact we wouldn't want on the square. Just in general in the square is supposed to be redeveloped. It is kind of it's, some things don't work as well as they should and needs a facelift. It could be better designed probably to serve more people or a variety of different things. That is supposed to happen in the coming years. There's no firm date for it, but that is on the horizon. That might be in 5 years' time or so. So I'm not entirely clear on the question, but by all means contact me directly if I've misunderstood it.
Could I ask Sharon again to just be crystal clear about, you've reached out to TDSB and the Catholic School Board, both of whom have said we can accommodate the incoming students. How does that square with someone looking at a development and seeing a sign that says there's no room for your kids, by the way, if you buy a condo? I mean, it's not a crazy question. How do these two things coexist?
Yeah, that's an interesting, I didn't hear that before, but I do know that the Toronto District School Board said that they are willing and will be able to, have students attend. But then I haven't heard back officially from, we did get a response back, sorry, from Catholic School Board, but they were going to take the discussion internal and then get back to us. And that's what we're pending.
Just to answer that a little bit more clearly, Jane, there are some schools that are absolutely at capacity, typically on the east side. So Earl Haig, McKee, and those signs generally refer to those schools, that if someone moves into a condo a new condo on the east side of Yonge Street, that's to let them know that they are not able to go to school at either typically McKee or Earl Haig. There is if you go by attendance area, the students coming into the Novotel would be going into schools west of Yonge, where there is some capacity. How much, we're not quite sure. The school board responded with the provincially rated capacity, which is one number to use, but is not always terribly helpful. So again, we're going to need to engage with the school board in some detail, talk to the local principals and figure out what capacity there actually is, how many students can be accommodated in very local schools and which may need to go outside of Willowdale to places where there is more space.
It's really helpful clarification. Thank you very much, Councillor. Okay, this is we have time for one more question. We're going to try to fit in as much as we can in the limit. We might go over a little bit, but
Jane, I would like to suggest we go over a bit. We still have a lot of people, and there's still 132 participants, and we want to give everybody a chance.
Absolutely. Let's do that then. Okay, so next up is Joe. You have the floor for a comment or a question.
Hi, can you hear?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay. I just want to ask a question and comment on it. And one question, one comment. Question is, we hear a lot of people in the neighborhood that mostly sounds like a little bit against on this coming project. So is this project, after this meeting, no matter how many residents participated today against on this project, is it still a go? This is a question. Second is, I think is, yes, we all know this one is coming, the info session, very last minute, but I'm wondering why Novotel raised up their hand in 2021 so early, about a year ago, and there is no communication to the residents in this neighborhood. We all know the refugee kind of project for a long time that federal government committed on it. And what is the Willowdale ward help us to bring the voice to, I don't know which part, that the resident is yes, go for it, or no, not go for it.
Some common themes here. Yep, Councillor.
Yeah, just so to be clear, and we didn't go into this a whole lot, but City Council, rightly or wrongly, delegated to staff the authority to find suitable sites for refugee housing. City staff selected this through a process as the best site available. It is highly likely that City Council will agree with that. And in particular, what is before City Council is the terms of a lease, not the location per se. The terms are for a specific location, but the question of City Council isn't, do you like this as a site? It's, do you agree with the terms of the lease for this site? That is the issue that is before City Council. And I think it is highly likely that the vote will be overwhelmingly in favor of proceeding. There may, however, still be amendments to the terms of the lease. I may make some of them.
Okay.
Jane, I might just jump in there as well. Councillor, thank you so much for that clarification. I think it is really important to stay focused on, as Jane had kicked off the meeting, the zone of influence here. And the question to council is really surrounding the terms of the lease. The first part of the question was around Novotel first put their hand up in 2021. Why are we just contracting now, and why are we just coming forward now? They first put their hand up in 2021. It wasn't until in the last month or so were we able to identify a clear need, the opportunity, and come to terms with the Novotel to such an extent that we were able to go to public and put a report to council. So while the Novotel has been indicating for a significant period that they're interested in partnering with the city, it wasn't until very recently and very rapidly did we come to an opportunity that is being presented right now.
Thank you. I want to just, make the best use of the time that we have here. There's a few questions people have asked about more permanent housing for refugees, and how, a shelter can be this place to land. Hopefully they don't have to stay long and they get into, better, more permanent type of housing. And so the question has been asked in various ways of, is the city investing in more permanent refugee housing? And, what sort of, supports are there for that as opposed to putting them up in hotels? I know the city's thinks about these things. Is it an appropriate question here on the panel? Sharon.
Yeah, hi, Sharon again. Yep. Certainly, the goal is when a family enters our program, any one of our programs, not just refugee specific, but certainly a family, for example, or even someone who's a single person. Our goal is to work with them to find housing so that they can return to the community as quickly as possible. We understand that there's sometimes challenges that, doesn't, always work where it's in a rapid response, but definitely our goal is to have folks housed in the community. We have housing benefits such as the Canada Ontario Housing Benefit, which is a portable benefit that folks can take and they can live anywhere within Ontario, for example. So I believe that would be an opportunity for these families, but the provider, they work closely with the clients as well as community agencies. There's housing counselors available, and that's the goal. And again, I can't keep reiterating the fact that our refugee, just based on experience, our refugee families, when they come into a program, think about it, they're disrupted, their lives are completely, thrown apart, but their goal is to try to get back into the community so that they can provide, have their families be in a safe space.
Great. Sharon, hold the line open there because I think I'm reading this one off the Q&A form, but this person writes that they're quite a bit in support of this project, and they see that it's important to provide dignified, safe accommodation for all refugees, and they want to help achieve that. But they're wondering why Ukrainian families have not been included in this particular service. A few people have asked about that. Do you have information on why they are not candidates for this service?
Yeah, I can briefly say that, and my colleagues can jump in. I can briefly say that it's a different response that is through the federal government. They're not, at this point, they were initially Ukrainians or Ukrainian arrivals. They're not eligible, for example, current states, and again, that can change, but they weren't eligible, for example, our benefits like Ontario Works and things like that. So the goal is for them to go through a different pathway. The folks who enter our shelter program are refugees, non-Ukrainian. They're able to get access to certain benefits so that they can go into the community while they continue to pursue their claim.
Okay.
And if I may, Jane,
Yeah.
jump in here at Sinead, there is a broader community effort of municipalities, including Toronto, around the Greater Toronto Horseshoe area, all working together in combination and funding with the federal government to lead the Ukrainian response, because it is a much broader issue than one city, and looking at the different municipalities to provide the support and networking opportunities needed to engage and help those fleeing the Ukraine and the necessary supports. And it's not just in Toronto. So it's all of the area municipalities working together on that effort. It's a very combined, coordinated effort there.
In a nutshell, I think that for families from the Ukraine, it's a different process, and is designed specifically for them and to be helpful to them. When I've asked this question of staff, I've been told that things can change, and at some point in the future there might or might not be a need to house some families from the Ukraine at this location, but at the moment it's being done in a different way in cooperation with the federal government and municipalities, as Sharon and Sinead said.
There's a number of questions that are, in the great journalistic tradition to follow the money. And money following is always, really important in these things. So a few questions have floated up around how financial oversight works. How, for instance, someone is asking a very concrete question by email earlier, which was like, if the rooms aren't full, is the city still going to pay for the room because it's on a floor that they rent out? They want to be able to track, so the first question is like, are rooms paid for regardless if they're occupied? But secondly, people are asking, how the money is going to be tracked and how transparent it is for the public. What's the fiscal oversight for a project of this nature? Look, Allison, is the seat getting hot enough yet?
No, these are good questions, and it's nice to have the opportunity to speak to them. So we are the contract is with respect to all of the rooms. So if we are for 5 years renting every single room in the hotel, based on that, we are working very closely with the operator and SSHA to ensure that all of those rooms are occupied. But we are renting all of the rooms regardless of occupation. In working with the counselor, we heard some questions about how best to ensure a successful activation of the site. And we had gone back to the operator to ensure that we've got a ramp up concept. So we're not taking all of the hotel rooms from day one. We are ramping up until November 1st, at which time we should be at full occupation. And that helps both the operator as well as the community, as well as the hotel operator sort of get their sea legs to get the site activated.
Right.
I think that sort of basic, the second part of your question around transparency and oversight, coming out of the audit, corporate real estate and SSHA are working very closely together to ensure that we're addressing some of the issues that were identified in the audit. We also have been very successful throughout the COVID period, particularly with respect to these hotel contracts. They're much easier to manage. They're much easier to have oversight over. And so we are working very closely, but we feel like this structure is actually the most transparent and the easiest to audit structure as compared to some of the other tools that we have in securing hotel rooms.
Okay.
Allison, I'm just going to jump in. I got distracted, so you may have mentioned this, but by agreeing to take all rooms, we get a better room rate than if we had said, no, we're not going to take all the rooms. We would have paid a higher rate per room. And I think you reached the conclusion that this doing it the way you're proposing saves us money in the long run.
Yes, I think that's a really good addition, Councillor. That's right.
Mm-hmm. And there's a lot of incentive for the city to be efficient and fill the rooms. Certainly there's demand, so hopefully this will work. One would say it would be ideal really for this to work. So, all right, let's go to the phone lines again. We got Robert on the line. Robert, what's on your mind? Comments or questions? Robert. Hopefully, maybe we're gonna have to come back. Let's go to NL. Andrea, NL, initials NL. You have the floor. Maybe 2 strikes on that one. What? NL, anyone? Okay. Finally, Christine, I believe we've heard from Christine once. Christine, your hand is up again here. Christine, can you hear?
Yes, hi.
Can you make it a quick one?
Quick one. So now it's unfortunate that it's been so long that that you've been speaking with Novotel. We're only finding out about this now. How long have you been contracting with Novotel, and what exactly are the terms that are up for discussion?
Great question. I think we've covered some of this. Allison, how long have you been in dialogue with Novotel, and what's up for influence has also been talked about, but quickly, if you can repeat that.
Very quick. The terms of the lease that are up for review to City Council are available on the City Council website. I don't know if Jane, we can provide the link somehow on the internet to specifically access it, but that is what is up for debate at council, and it includes specific reference to the terms of the lease as well as the catering contract. In terms of how long have we been in discussions with the Novotel, specifically with respect to this contract, it has just been a matter of weeks in terms of actually getting to a point of time when they could bring demand and an opportunity together.
Great, thank you. Councillor, do you want to speak to that? I know you're working hard on a number of things about the lease and the details, and you've answered previously what's up for influence, but just to reiterate, what are the core concerns you're trying to address in this lease agreement before it's approved?
I'm mainly 2 things. Just one is the food service, to make sure that the food is obtained at a good price, but very nutritious and plentiful for the sake of the residents, but also culturally diverse and something suited to the people who'll be living there. Also, that there is enough opportunity for local business to bring meals in, and for the residents to go out for meals. Also, making sure that there's enough space and facilities such as the swimming pool for use by the residents. So a number of things around that. if anyone wants to read the report, I know Allison referred to it, but it's on the current council agenda. If you will email me, I will send you a link. But if you go to Toronto Timmis, TIMMIS, there will be a meeting schedule. And if you go to the current council meeting under GGLC, this is probably a lot to remember.
I will send out emails. I'll put it on the Gmail. If anyone wants it, this agenda
Great.
report,
Good,
please
thank
email. All right, we're gonna actually wrap. We're 10 minutes over. People have been incredibly patient and really good at being succinct and direct. We've done our best to get through a lot of questions. We remind you that there is a second meeting on July 27th. And we are there to, by that time, we'll have more information. We'll want more questions. So I want to throw it to the counselor for any kind of final reflection, closing remarks before we close the meeting.
No, just wanted to thank people for attending. It was really a terrific turnout, lots of, very good questions, lots of good answers. One of the best meetings like this I have attended, I would say. So thanks to all the participants, both city staff and yourself, Jane, great job, and all the residents who participated.
Thank you, Councillor. And really, this is democracy. It's ugly, but it's ugly beautiful. And without people showing up for these meetings, someone asked in the chat, will there ever be a live meeting? Well, let's hope, because they're a lot more fun than sitting on a screen. I'm super into that. COVID's still a factor, but this is the beginning of a longer engagement process if it's approved. So I'll meet you on email. There'll be more information on the website, and tune into the councilor's newsletter for updates. A summary of this meeting will be posted on the website, a recording on YouTube with closed captions on it. There's the email, 3parkhomeave@gmail.com, and the website toronto.ca/3parkhome. We'll see you again, folks. Anything else? Maybe Sharon or Allison or Loretta for a final word from the city. Sharon.
I just wanted to extend my appreciation again. Really great questions. The ones that we weren't able to get to, we'll definitely provide those answers. But again, and thank you to Councillor Filion for bringing us together, and everyone here from city staff and Jane and your team as well. So we're looking forward to working together on this.
Okay, thanks everyone. We'll see you again. Bye-bye. Hello, team. I